by his own estimation, the fourth time that Tim Hale and I have had a chance to talk about who is Tim Hale, a 33-year-old Army Reserve veteran who was incarcerated for nearly 3 years in a Washington, D.C. gulag in prison for nonviolent offenses simply by being at the Capitol on January 6th with other people who supported President Trump in the election that we all know now, legally proven in court, was fraught with fraud in Pennsylvania and other places. We know this by court verdicts over the summer. But Tim Hale, this is a great, great turn of events for you and for the other January 6th defendants and for America in general when it comes to actually having constitutional rights again respected at the highest levels of government. How are you?
I am so good I can't stand it. In fact, I'm not just good, I'm good enough. Thank you so much for having me back on. This is such a phenomenal occasion, and I couldn't be happier.
So January 20th, we're all looking at January 20th, the day that President Trump is inaugurated again as our commander-in-chief. He's vowed to pardon all January 6th defendants, or at least as many as he possibly can, and he could do all of them, and he should. But what led up to this and what has happened since January 6th of 2021 is a travesty not only of justice, but a trampling of rights not seen, maybe since America's Civil War in the 1860s. But there were many people who were jailed in the interim after January 6th for social media posts and what they were reading. This is crazy. So what exactly got you in the hoosegow on January 6th, Tim, just for people who haven't heard your story before? Let's do a quick review.
Sure. You know, I worked an overnight shift as a security contractor for the military, and I was also the union rep. I had a very bad relationship with management because of that, because they violated a lot of laws. And so they actually tipped off NCIS I was at the Capitol. They didn't know I did anything bad or anything, but NCIS came to my house looking for me. They found my roommate. They strapped my roommate with a wire, and they tried to get him to incriminate me while I was drinking. And they then framed me as a domestic terrorist. And it was a long journey after that. They ended up putting me in solitary confinement for about a year in the D.C. jail. They called it the D.C. Gulag. Spent about 2 years in the D.C. jail, and then another year in federal prison after that. So I spent about 3 years behind bars for walking through the Capitol building. And there's your justice system, America. Now, I was also an amateur comedian, and so they tried to take satire of mine and frame me as a far-right extremist because, as you just mentioned, people they could take anything. Like, they took memes off of my phone to make me seem like I was a domestic terrorist. I mean, this is the fate of America. It's very Orwellian, but I'm glad that this is nearing its end. Thank God.
Well, this Department of Justice, the one you're talking about, which, that's about as real a term, Department of Justice, as the Inflation Reduction Act. But this Department of Justice also trying to put somebody in prison for a meme about the election in 2016 with telling Democrats that they could vote the day after the election. I don't know if they were ever successful in putting that person in jail for that meme, but the thought police have been alive and well since January 6th of 2021 in America, and they're about to be defunded, I hope, by President Trump.
I hope so, too. I also hope they defund NPR. You know, they tried to use NPR hit pieces about me at my sentencing hearing. I mean, this is publicly funded NPR articles were used by the prosecution to try to sentence me to over twice my guidelines. That's how I got 4 years instead of 20 months. It's quite an incestuous relationship. I hope Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, I hope they defund NPR. That's number one on my agenda.
Well, it's been one of the bullseyes that Trump has pointed out already. The incoming Trump administration, they've already said, we're going to let them survive on their own. I thought that only only communist countries had state-run media, state-funded media. I didn't know that was happening in America. A lot of people didn't know that, but we've seen example after example after example of the. I mean, we've got Pravda alive and well in this country right now, and taxpayers should not be funding it.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I mean, it's a modern day Operation Mockingbird. You know, it's it's state propaganda. That's all it is, just for narratives.
That's good. I wanted to point out something I just saw today, and this is an article, a column that came out yesterday, as a matter of fact, by the great legal mind Jonathan Turley. And he talks about, here's the title, Congress's January 6th investigation looks less and less credible. And this was in the Hill, so if you want to check it out. He says, on January 6, 2021, the nation rocked by the disruption of the certification of Joe Biden as our next president, with Donald Trump set to return to the White House in 2025. It is astonishing how much of that day remains a matter of intense debate. And he said those divisions are likely only to deepen after a slew of recent reports that have challenged the selective release of information from the House January 6th committee. And you just talked about how an NPR was used in your trial against you. But he said January 6th remains as much a political litmus test as a historical event, whether you refer to that day as a riot or an insurrection puts you on one side or the other of a giant political chasm. They never charged Donald Trump with insurrection. They never charged any of the January 6th defendants with insurrection. How come that drumbeat was riveted into our heads over and over again by mainstream media, also part of the state-run media or state-sponsored media?
Well, because it was purely atrocity propaganda. That's why they never released all the video. They just wanted you to see the same 30-second clips of someone breaking a window for 3 years, because it was just about a narrative. And again, you saw what they tried to do with him in states like Colorado, where they tried to use the 14th Amendment, the insurrection clause, to bar him from office. I mean, this was just a ploy. They sabotaged the 2020 election, and if he didn't go down quietly, they wanted to use that to sabotage the 2024 election. I mean, that was the ultimate, that was the end result, was that they would prosecute him if he didn't keep quiet. And that's what they ended up doing. And so I think they used us as tools against him. And then I think it was part of a long game they had.
Well, as you mentioned, they only showed the portions of the video that supported the prosecution side in most of these trials of people. There is a sheriff, and I'm trying to remember his name, a sheriff from Williamson County in Tennessee, a sheriff's deputy who's like 70 years old, who was arrested and was still in jail, and I'm trying to think of his name. But as you and I have talked in the past, there were plenty of people, in fact, people that you were in a cell with at one time or another, who you know and admitted they were informants for the FBI and the powers that be, and they got less time than you did, because I guess they were snitching on the side of the people in power at the time.
Yeah, I mean that's what makes the pardon thing a little contentious between J6ers. Like I personally think that I don't think it's about who was violent or who was peaceful. I don't think it's about who had misdemeanors or felonies. I think pardons should be for those who went there for the right reasons. And I think that if you went there to screw over other protesters, if you went there to entrap people, if you went there to hurt Trump, or if you went there to hurt the election or the country, then maybe you don't get a pardon. I think it's a little more nuanced than most people make it out to be. But yeah, I mean, I always look at it like this. One of the lead FBI guys from the Wolverine Watchman Fednapping plot, that fake kidnapping plot in Michigan, he got promoted after that to the D.C. office. So, like, when you look at the Wolverine Watchman kidnapping thing, 2/3 of those dudes ended up being informants. So, like, how many people, with the thousands and upon thousands of people in D.C. on January 6th, how many of them might have been bad actors who had infiltrated the crowd? I think there was a lot of it. And I met, as you just mentioned, I met a few bad actors, and they don't care. The public doesn't know this, but they deserve to know. And that's why I hope that he stops the prosecutions when he gets in. I hope he releases my friends who are in prison. But before the pardons, I hope that he gets control of the DOJ, maybe the DOD, and even DHS. And I hope he gets lists of all the actors that were there that day to set us up. And just, check the lists. If you see any similar names on the defendant list, maybe cross those ones off. That's just my preference.
Multiple defendants, Tim Hale, report being denied bail despite no prior criminal records. Were you one of those?
That is correct. Yeah, a lot of us were held in spite of the Bail Reform Act in D.C. In fact, there was a ruling called the Munchell decision. Some people ended up getting released because of this ruling, and others didn't. They were very selective in how they applied it, but the ruling was that if you had no connections to extremist organizations, if you had committed no new crimes after January 6th, then you were good to go. But they didn't apply that across the board. But yeah, many people were detained for no reason other than for narratives. They wanted to portray people like Julian Cater, for instance, as cop killers when no cops died at the Capitol. They did the same thing with the Oath Keepers. It's crazy.
This is not just a new thing in Washington, D.C. Used to be elected mayor of Washington, D.C., you had to be a crack addict. There's been documentation of pre-dawn raids affecting dozens of families where the FBI or whomever was raiding their homes to arrest them for being at the Capitol on January 6th used flashbang devices, which actually started fires and caused fire damage inside these defendants' homes. There's new evidence that, and I mentioned this earlier, Tim, suggesting some defendants were charged based on social media posts and reading choices, and you mentioned your meme. And here's the other thing. If people get pardoned, shouldn't they be made whole as much as the government can do that financially because of the legal fees and because of the time lost at work? Maybe they've lost jobs, they've lost businesses. Shouldn't there be a push by the Department of Justice now to make these people whole? A pardon's nice, and being released from the gulags and the prison is even nicer, but, these people have been damaged on spurless charges now for almost 4 years. But what's the remedy there legally?
Well, I think you're right. They do deserve to be made whole. The problem is, and you had mentioned, shouldn't the DOJ be doing this now? They absolutely should. They should also stop prosecuting people and kicking in doors, but they're just not. Unfortunately, this is going to have to wait until the new administration. It's the same old story. They're ramping up the arrests. They're not stopping them. And so, yeah, they should be working towards this. The Supreme Court just overturned the one felony charge I had, that fake obstruction charge that went back to Enron. The Supreme Court overruled it, and they still haven't dropped it from my case after I already served my sentence. This is crazy. They don't care. They just don't care. It's totally vindictive. But when we get new blood in there and we actually get control, I think that's when you're going to start seeing some restitution there. Yeah, I think people should be compensated for losing their homes, for losing their jobs. A lot of the defendants I met were not just blue collar workers. Like they were businessmen. They made their own. They were small businessmen. They made their own livelihoods. They lost everything. You can't get that back. You can't get those years back. No. How much money do you put on a year of your life? It's crazy.
No doubt about that. And the great dichotomy, too, is what happened with the National Guard when there were the riots near the White House where they burned the church and President Trump came out with a Bible. The National Guard was allowed to be there, but the request or the offer of National Guardsmen at the Capitol on January 6th that President Trump made to both Nancy Pelosi's Sergeant-at-Arms in the House and Senator Schumer's Sergeant-at-Arms in the Senate were both denied. No, we got this handled. All of it smells like the most colossal setup in the world. That was just, and we saw then the political lawfare that they pursued against Donald Trump as soon as he announced he was running again. So I mean, it's no big secret that they have been using their position of power to silence political foes and political dissent. That is straight out of the USSR.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like you just said, it's flagrant. They don't care that we know. They know that we know, and it's not an issue to them. I mean, Pelosi's on video. It took us 3 years to get it, but she's on video taking responsibility for the fact that there was no National Guard. She's on video saying this is my fault, and it is her fault. It's also Mayor Bowser's fault. She's in charge of the Metro PD. Pelosi was in charge of the Capitol PD. We have body cameras from Metro PD officers from January 6th. And after they get called to the situation, they realize how outnumbered they are. They're like, they set us up. And they're responding to each other like, yeah, absolutely. They set us up. And who's they? They answered to Nancy Pelosi and Mayor Bowser. So, yeah, the Democrats set them up. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if there were some rhinos inside Congress who were a part of it, too. They hate Trump that much. I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, I mean, we've seen the Liz Cheneys and the Adam Kissingers of the world kissing up to the Marxists in office who are Democrats. Tim Hale, where can people find you? What are you doing these days, man?
I'm getting ready for vindication. There's a lot of things I'm working on. I'm talking to a magnanimous fellow such as yourself right now, sir. I'm working on some things, some writing. I'm actually writing on the Gateway Pundit. I'm actually publishing articles about January 6th defendants.
Oh, cool.
Yep. If people want to follow my trolling, you can find me on Twitter. I'm Tim Hale, criminally funny J6er. And as always, sir, I appreciate you having me on. And one last thing I'd like to plug. Thanksgiving and Christmas are coming up. So there's still a couple months till we get those pardons. So if anybody wants to help J6 families, please go to patriotfreedomproject.com. Any donation you make would make a world of difference. Thank you so much for having me back on.
Repeat the organization again, Tim.
It is patriotfreedomproject.com.
Thank you, sir. God bless you, and happy Thanksgiving, Tim.
And a happy New Year.
Yeah, indeed. It should be a happy New Year for you and everybody else.
Absolutely.
A new sheriff in town. All right, fantastic.